Welcome to the Accepted Authority, where we help you solve a common growth challenge in consulting. As always, with me is Greg Rowith. G'day, Greg.
G'day, Andy. Good to be here.
Excellent to have you here and for you listening as well. Today, we're going to talk about something that is something on both of our minds sort of recently, and it's really about how do we stand out with really high competition. In consulting, we looked at some numbers recently. There's 90,000 firms in Australia alone that focus on management consulting and consulting related services. That's just a massive number. You know, when we consider consulting is a fairly sort of niche space. In the UK alone, in 2021, more than 2 million firms entered the market. You know, think about that. There's what, 40, 50 million in the UK potentially, and there's 2 million firms, a lot of them small or solo operators, who have entered the market. So, you know, you ally that with the fact that it's really hard to get face time with our ideal customers now. There's a preference to do their research and their understanding of what they need online, their problem solving. So it all creates a bit of a situation where we kind of go, well, how do we stand out? How do we cut through the noise? And ultimately, how are we going to be able to get in front of our ideal customers consistently enough so we can start to plan and actually be the leader that we all want to be in our firm? So I thought for this episode, we could sort of talk more around our own experiences around how we stand out as part of as niche consulting operators, small firms. So I think maybe to start with, Greg, do you want to sort of share a little bit about, how do you, first of all, what's your reaction to those figures? And secondly, how has that sort of changed your thinking about how do you stand out in front of with a lot of competition?
Yeah, well, those figures are quite astounding, really. I hadn't realized that that's the situation, but it really does emphasize, how important it is to stand out from the crowd. And, I think a lot of consultants don't really stand out from the crowd. In fact, even just this morning on my mastermind call with my client group, a couple of people new in the program, we're talking about this challenge in itself. How do we stand out? Just getting started in the consulting business. Maybe there are a couple that are adding to that number that we talked about, but it's the getting traction in the market, as a startup consultant when there's so much competition is a big factor, obviously. But also, if we've been established for a while, we've got all these new hungry consultants coming onto the market looking for work and potentially taking our clients. So there's a reality there with those numbers that maybe change the landscape a little bit in terms of how we approach marketing and how we stand out from the crowd. So I think that is a really important aspect.
Yeah, it certainly makes you consider that you can't just put your head in the sand and assume and rely on the sort of old school way of thinking where we're going to go to our network, they're going to supply us with bountiful leads for the next 3 to 5 years. We can just treat our website like it's an online brochure. We don't have to do any, social media. We can just get away with just sort of being there and not actually contributing. I think that the time is changing, and it's a sobering reality that if you're a one-person operation, if you're 10-person, if you're 30-person, the fact is that the competition will continue to be increasing because with the pandemic, we also saw a lot of people who decided, you know what, I'm just going to go to the country and do my own thing. And so if you take that from a consulting point of view, there's going to be more and more businesses of people that are working in, say, larger firms, and they decide, you know what, I feel like I just prefer the lifestyle change where I'm going to start my own firm, or I'm going to join maybe a smaller firm, and together as a collective, we're a bit more nimble. We understand the digital space a bit more, and ultimately you've been running your business for 20 years, but as you say, Greg, all these, I guess, younger or more nimble operators, savvy, they come in and they say, we know the buyer journey right now and how to appeal to our ideal clients in this new digital world. We're going to start eroding your market. And that's where things like reputation, even though it's important, you can't hang your hat on it. Just because you've been in business for 20 years doesn't mean that customers are automatically going to go, you know what, I'm going to choose them because they've had a track record. It's more and more about, do they say the right things? When I research them, I don't know them from a bar of soap unless it's a recognized brand, but usually we assume that companies, potential buyers don't know who we are. Maybe they've heard of us before, maybe they haven't. So it's really important to then consider, what do they value? And then ultimately, does that allow them to make that connection that we are that authority? So maybe if we shift gears now, Greg, and we just talk about the power of being focused on one target market. We call it niching, or being really clear, because to me, that's the first thing that we can do as consulting firms. We can actually really appeal and tailor to one particular target market, which allows that sense of that we are the authority, and that's how we start to stand out. Is that your experience? And maybe if you could talk about how you've done it with Business Flight Path.
Yeah. Well, it's very true, and I think the potential, and I was thinking, not only has the pandemic changed the landscape for us in terms of the local market being more impacted and having more competition, but we're now in a global market because we're now online. We don't have to go to the client's office anymore, depending on which area you're in or which niche you're in. But for a lot of us as consultants now, we do our work online, and that means we're not in a local market, we're now in a global market. And so our competition is now not just a few consultants that are in the same city as we are, but the consultants all around the world who are now marketing into our locality, and our clients who are now looking worldwide for someone to solve their problem.
Yes.
So it really intensifies that challenge. And I think, the importance of niching is really critical in this aspect, because we can't be all things to all people. If that's what we're trying to do, offer our services to as many people as possible, because we don't want to limit our chances, we end up being that small fish in the huge lake. But when we identify an ideal target market for us and niche down into that target market, we can become that big fish in the small pond. And so when they are looking for help with us that they find, we can dominate that market, whereas we've got no hope trying to be all things to everyone. So the point is really identifying and maybe niching in a different way from what most people recommend, which is typically around an industry or a profession that we're going to specialize in. But I think more and more beneficial for us is if we are specialized in solving a specific problem, then it's not so much about what industry or profession, but what situation is our client in? What's the challenge that they're facing that is biggest to them? That could be across a range of different industries or professions or personal situations. So when we can focus and highlight on those things and proactively market around that issue and challenge, then we're going to stand out because no one else is doing it.
Yes. And that's a really good point, Greg. I think something that I've learned a lot, not only the course through our conversations here, but just generally about how I market myself, my firm, and my clients, is that we need to get focused on talking about solving problems, because that's why clients come to us. The clients don't want a consulting firm. They want someone who can take their problem away. They don't want a marketing firm. They want to generate consistent leads. So I think that you bang on there, thinking about how we market ourselves in the sense that we are solving problems, and the product or the service is definitely secondary. So when we talk about what we do on LinkedIn, when we talk about what we do on our website, when we talk about what we do in a webinar, it's really a case of people don't care about the product. They just, if you can be the person that just is obsessively focused on solving the 1, 2, or 3 main problems that a particular type of client has, then that's where you're going to be able to sort of stand out. And as an example, I think about my journey when I started Concurve. It was really around copywriting. Because that's what I retrained in before I was a writer and recruiter, and I thought copywriting, that sounds a bit like me. But as I sort of evolved, I felt like, well, maybe the key is to be a more general marketing services company. You come to me, guess what? I've got all these people who can do it. We can do all these different things, and branding and graphics, and we can do, this over here. And it ended up just being who I attracted was just licorice all sorts. It was different sort of organization. And it became a bit of a challenge. So I thought that once I decided to refocus and just think about one particular client, and then what are the 3 or 5 or the key problems that they have over and over time, I'm standing out against, more of like larger firms who call themselves, big marketing agencies or digital marketing companies. I found that companies are coming to me who say, you know what, we've chosen you over a firm of 20 or 30 because you just focus on consulting firms and helping them grow. And the 3 things that you look at solving, that's exactly what we need right now. So quite often, if you articulate or you prescribe the problem, then you're credited with the solution. That's a saying that I love. And I think that it's also your experience too, Greg, right? Like you could be very broad, and you've had a play at different sort of areas. I think you used to be sort of accounting firms, and now you've really sort of focused your niche. And this is a conversation that happens to you too. You've told us a few times on this podcast, but people come to you because they say, you know what, you talk as if you're speaking directly to me in my situation.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. And well, going back to when I started in consulting, when every client's a good client, and I wasn't as educated as I am now. It was about the services I offer. We're in business consulting, so we did business planning, we did business systemization, automation, digital transformations to some extent, and that's what everyone else offered. But we were that small fish in a big lake in that situation. It was very difficult to get traction. Typically, in that situation, you're always competing against someone else, and when you're invited to come in and present a proposal, it's up against 3 or 4 others. So it's always, well, you better be sharpening your pencil, because there's a couple of others here we're talking to as well, which is a horrible situation to be in as a consultant. I realized that after a while, there were certain types of clients I really enjoyed working with, and things were very easy in the relationship, and the results flowed from that. Other types of clients were really difficult to work with, and results weren't happening. And more often than not, I was the one who put a stop to the relationship, because I wasn't just there for the money. So doing that, was starting to choose who I wanted to work with and who I didn't want to work with. And when I looked at the ones I did want to work with, they seemed to have a similar profile. So it was a fairly easy decision in the end to say, well, if I'm going to be looking for clients, why don't I look for people who look like my best clients, instead of just saying, here's what we do for everyone. And so I really evolved from that practical, on the ground challenge for me, in just deciding that not every client was a good client. So who are the good ones, and how do I get more like that?
So true, Greg. And a similar story for me. I went through an exercise at the start of this year and sort of went, let's pick 3 potential types of clients that I can work with. And we landed at one particular Spot, which was the consulting firm, who was anywhere from sort of 10 to 50 staff and certain revenue size, and why that was a good fit. And then I looked at the sort of companies that I'd really enjoyed working with, and there was exactly that similarity. And even if I go back to my days in consulting, I worked for a firm that was, I worked for a company called SMS. I think they're called ASG now. They're I think they're considered more of a mid to large, not a big four, but they're certainly, I was certainly knocking on the door. So probably 1,000 plus, quite a big firm. And I remember the dynamic when I was recruiting for them, and thinking about how do we attract good people at that stage. And it was a completely different story when I went to a much smaller firm. I think there were 50 people in that firm. And again, I was doing the same thing. And I think the conversations were quite different. It was really around, now this firm is up against the likes of this really big firm. How do we differentiate ourselves? And it really came down to, I think for them, it was about the specialization. They had 5 practice managers or practice leads, and those people were so central about saying, look, you know what, we know this, we're specialists in the utility space, so we're specialists in the government space. And to me, that was where I sort of saw that evolution about, you can be big, but if you're small, you can actually find a way. And so that niching effect has then now flowed on to what I do now. And then what I tell my clients too. Yes, you can serve 5 organizations or 5 types of clients, but what if we just focus on this one? And what difference would that make if you could get more of those? So I think it's a great point that you make, Greg. And it's a really, when you're thinking about this competition idea, yes, there can be a bit of a fear, if you like, but there's some simple things that we can do to really stand out and start standing out right now.
Yeah, that's right. Another aspect in that specialization and focus, particularly with who we compete against, and often, Big Four is a concern, or the larger firms are a concern for smaller consulting firms. But I've got a couple of clients now who, because of their focused specialization, are being invited by the bigger firms to partner with them on projects where they don't have the expertise or the specialized expertise that my client has. So rather than being in competition, they're now in cooperation with those bigger firms and get more opportunities as a result of that. So,
amazing.
Another aspect to consider in that specialization, you not only become ideal candidates for your clients, but you're also ideal partners for your potential competitors if you go about it the right way.
What a great story. And you can kind of see that now, can't you, with the fragmentation of the workforce. There's more and more people who just say, look, I just want to be this technical specialty, and that grows, and that's how a lot of consulting firms start, of course. And as you say, you read about the acquisitions or the mergers or buying this business, and it's pretty simple because there was a need. They decided to solve a problem as a specialty, and being able to play off that specialty and not trying to be all things to all people, which is something that the bigger firms. That's just how they've decided to start here. They all started at one spot and they've just added on. So nowadays, especially with things like intentional search, we're searching for certain organizations or specialties. It actually does really pay to just being really focused in your specializations. That's a great story, Greg, and a credit to you. So we've sort of come to the end of our podcast. Is there anything else you wanted to add that we might have missed around how do we stand out from the increasing competition, Greg?
I think that's an important point. How do we stand out? Some obvious things, which some of those are pretty challenging. But behind me, if you're on the podcast, you won't be able to see it. But there's a whole bunch of books that I've read, which are all business-related books. People who've written those books are obvious experts in their field. And that's a brilliant way to stand out. I've got a couple of books myself that have elevated my authority in the position. But I would have to say the first thing you do is not write a book. You know, that's a big task, and it's it cannot actually slow down your progress. But it's really what's important is what's the message. If you were going to write a book, what's the message you would want to write that book about? That has to be the key message in all of your marketing activities, and everything you talk about is really focused around that key message that one day you might write the book about. But until then, what are your LinkedIn posts about? What are your YouTube videos about? What are the ebooks you write? What are the articles in magazines you write about? And have that core focus and a core message that you become known for. And if you can do that, you start to stand out as more and more people see those core message articles or videos that you're creating on a regular basis.
I love that, Greg. There's an old saying that also I like, when you're doing a presentation, you keep the same presentation, you just change the audience. Yeah. So it's the same process, exactly. If you don't have to think about changing what you say, every week, it's just you have the core idea, and then there's different ways to tell. Like, for example, with this podcast series, our focus is all around how do you grow in consulting? How do you stand out from the crowd? But it's just, and we've just covered off different topics to be able to share how we go about doing that. So thank you for what a great conversation it's been. So thank you for listening. And Greg, thank you as always. Where can we find you online?
Yeah, well, on LinkedIn, just search for Greg Roworth, and on my website at businessflightpath.com.
Awesome. You can find me at Andy Marmont on LinkedIn, or it's concurve.com.au is our website. Thank you again for your time, and we'll see you next time on the Accepted Authority.